My mom started having some memory problems. She'd gotten up that morning, wanted to go to the library, but my dad was sleeping in. So she decided she was going to get in the car and go to the library. She made it to the library all right. And she got there and she said she couldn't read the book and she got scared. And so she got in the car and got lost.
I'm your host, Valerie Borgman, and I'm so excited to welcome author Tracy Crump. Tracy had no idea that her years as an ICU nurse would help prepare her for her mother's mysterious illness, a mystery that Tracy's diligence helped solve. She even prevented a potentially life-threatening mistake when hospital staff attempted to give her father the wrong medication. Through everything, Tracy reminds us how important it is to advocate for your loved one. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Senior Living, a podcast for sons, daughters, grandkids, and spouses who suddenly find themselves tangled in the search for senior living and care. If you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and check out our doable download in today's show notes for a printable summary of the show and a bonus tip from our guest. You're listening to our doable tips, short answers to your questions. Don't see your question listed? Send us a note. Then don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an answer. Thank you so much for being on the show and for your interest and support on Instagram as well. As you probably realize, education is a huge passion of mine. And in working with seniors, and I have really found that our family talk episodes are so incredibly helpful for everyone, for our guests and for other families to see that they're not alone. And so
Yeah.
I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You know, I always say that no one wants to think about this. No one wants to talk about this because we don't want to face, our inevitable future, our
Mm,
parents as they decline. It is
yeah.
a tough subject. And so how did it all begin?
Well, my parents lived about a mile from us, which was a huge blessing. And my dad had been in poor health for several years, but he could still drive, do some things. And my mom was doing great, and she kind of took care of him. So I was not called upon very often. But they were just rocking along. Everything was going okay. And then my mom started having some memory problems. And so we took her to a geriatric doctor, and he said she had mild cognitive disorder, which can develop into something worse or not. So we were just kind of watching her for a while. Then one summer, she just suddenly started going downhill very quickly. Her memory was getting worse and worse, and she had some odd motor symptoms, which didn't really go along with dementia. She would lean to one side and not realize she was doing it, or she would walk kind of hunched over, and I'd say, Is your stomach hurting? And she'd say, No. And she didn't even realize she was doing it. So we started going to doctors, and her primary care physician did an MRA, which is an MRI with contrast, and it's more in depth. And he said they didn't really see anything significant. And she had a little brain atrophy, which is normal with age, but she was starting to kind of feel dizzy at times and still doing these other odd. She would walk on the side of her foot, was really odd, just some really odd things. And so he sent us to an ENT doctor. He said she may have some inner ear problems. We went and he said, Yeah, we think that's what it is, and gave her some exercises to do, and they didn't do any good. And she was just getting worse and worse. And everything kind of came to a head one day when she showed up at my door. And up until then, my dad had done most of the driving. And it wasn't because she couldn't drive, but that's just kind of what they did. And so she loved to read. She could devour a book in one day. And she'd gotten up that morning, wanted to go to the library, but my dad was sleeping in. She would get so irritated with him because he would sleep late. And she was ready to be on the go and do things. And so she decided she was going to get in the car and go to the library. Well, she made it to the library all right. And she got there and she said she couldn't read the book. She couldn't find what she wanted. She couldn't read the spines. And she got scared. And so she got in the car and got lost. And somehow she made it back to my house. And so I brought her in, sat her down, we talked about it. I said, "You don't need to drive anymore. Do not drive." And so anyway, that just really kind of propelled things. And I thought, we've got to do something. We've got to find out something. So talked to her doctor again and said, "I think we need to go to a neurologist." We did, and he did just a cursory memory test and said, "She's got dementia," just flippantly like that, right in front
Oh
of her.
my gosh.
And I thought, I said, "But she's got other symptoms, just odd." And so anyway, he recommended one thing, which she'd also passed out when she was standing up cooking, and that was another thing. She was cooking less and less able to do the normal things that she always did. Finally, and all this time, Valerie, I don't know how you'll feel about this, but I just could not sleep. I could not sleep at night. I'm a former nurse. I worked in ICU before we had children. And you just kind of think, I should be able to figure out this out. I should be able to figure out what's going on. And we'd gone from one doctor to another, and I couldn't sleep for a month or more. And I just tossed and turned. And my faith is very important to me, and I would pray, and I would say, "Lord, please give me direction. Show me what we need to do," over and over and over again. And then I would think, "Oh, you know what? We haven't checked this." And I would just kinda give it to the Lord and take it right back, and just so I'd say, "Okay, we need to do this." Well, finally, after weeks and weeks of that, I was exhausted. I said, "Lord, I don't know what else to do." And I said, "I just give it over to you." And that night, as I fell asleep, I remembered a friend whose dad had had similar symptoms. And I thought, what was that he had? And three words came to mind, which probably will mean nothing to your audience, but it was normal pressure hydrocephalus. I thought, hmm. So I got up the next morning, I looked it up, and she had all the cardinal signs. When we went back to the neurologist, I said, "Could she have normal pressure hydrocephalus?" And he said, "No." I said, "Why not?" "Why do you think that?" He said, "Because her MRI didn't show it." Fortunately, I had done my research. And I said, "But isn't it true that the MRI is not always definitive? Isn't there a special test you can do?" And he kind of backed off and he said, "Well, yeah," but he said, "You'd have to go to a neurosurgeon." And I said, "Okay." So we went to the neurosurgeon, and I talked to him, told him everything, we were going through. And I said, "Do you think this could be normal pressure hydrocephalus?" And he said, "No." And I said,
Oh my goodness.
"Deja vu, we've been here before." I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because her MRI doesn't show it." And he said, "Also because her walking is not indicative of it." And he said, "She can lift her feet." And I said, "But one time," I said, "we were going up the stairs, and all of a sudden she stopped, and I said, 'What's wrong?' And she said, 'I feel like my feet are stuck.'" And I said, "She couldn't walk up the steps." And I knew that was one of the problems people complained of. I said, "Isn't there a special test that you can do?" And he said, "Well, yeah," but he said, "If you really want to do that." And it kind of made me feel like you're a bad daughter for asking. It's not a pleasant test. You have to have a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture, and you have to go back 3 days in a row for scans. It's not a pleasant thing to go through. And he said, "If you really want to do that, we can do that." And so I said, "Well, let me talk to my dad." And this was right around the holidays. And, nothing much happens during the holidays as far as medical tests and things. And so by the time I talked to my dad, and we decided, yes, that we do want to do this. And by the time we got around to it, she had fallen again, and she had started falling. This is one of the cardinal signs of it. So she had ended up in the hospital. And her regular doctor said, "Well, I think maybe she could do with some rehab. Let's put her in a skilled nursing facility and see if that helps." She was in there, and the first day when we admitted her there, just so happened, which I don't think this was a just so, the doctor who oversee saw the medical facility, she only made rounds about every 3 weeks or so. Well, she just happened to be making rounds that day, and she stopped in our room, and I just dumped on her. I talked to her for 20 minutes, told her everything that we had observed and everything we've been going through. I mentioned the normal pressure hydrocephalus, and she said, "You know what?" She said, "The learning curve is going straight up on this." She said, "It's even been featured on television and news programs." She said, "We don't know that much about normal pressure hydrocephalus." And she said, "You only have one mother." She said, "You need to do everything you can for her." So that was it makes me cry now. It was a confirmation for me that we needed to move forward with
Wow.
that. By this time, she had lost the ability to walk. She could barely answer 1 or 2 words to a question. No conversation and no memory. I'm telling you, she was on her way out. So we got the test done. Lo and behold, she did have normal pressure hydrocephalus. And what happens in that is the cerebral spinal fluid that normally bathes the brain and the spinal cord is blocked or it's not being reabsorbed. And it's like you've heard of babies with hydrocephalus, they call it water on the brain that are born that way. And their brains are flexible and I mean, their skulls are flexible and can expand, but an adult's cannot. And they're just learning that adults can have this too. And so it presses, of course, the fluid builds up and presses on the brain. So what they did was inserted a shunt and drained that fluid out. She made an amazing turnaround. Within 3 days, she was making complete sentences. She could remember what an aide had said when 10 minutes before when she'd come into the room. She never fully recovered her mobility. And so from that moment on, she was not able to actually care for herself or my dad. We
Wow.
had for her for 3 more years.
Oh my gosh. What an amazing, we have talked about this before. You have to be an advocate for your loved one, for yourself.
Yes.
You knew your mom better than anybody,
Mhm,
and we
mhm.
know ourselves better than anyone. And doctors are human.
No,
and
yes,
right.
yes.
And so I love your story. And there is another thing that I think is so important about your story, and that is the bucket that we tend to put people in.
Mm,
And, this is something that we haven't actually talked about on the show yet.
mm,
But the fact that there are other things medically that can present as dementia,
mhm.
can present as Alzheimer's, and that we tend to just want to quickly put people into a bucket. And so,
Right.
how amazing that you continued to fight and advocate, and you knew
Mhm.
that something wasn't right.
Right.
And I think that's just really incredible. And also what a wonderful lesson that if there are symptoms that don't fit, then let's take a look. Let's see if there
Mhm,
isn't something else that's going on. So at this point, now there's been a physical decline. So you know what's going on. You know what the problem was. Did you step in at that point to help your dad with the caregiving, or what did that next phase look like?
Well, she spent about 3 months total in the skilled nursing facility, and I'll be honest, it was scary to me. Even being a nurse, it was scary to me to bring her home because they wanted to stay in their own home, and I was close. That was like I said, that was a huge blessing. But I had my own home to take care of, and, I knew it was gonna be difficult. So, we began looking at
Yeah.
we talked about several different things, and I actually had them talk it into at the time, going into an assisted living facility. They kinda resisted at first.
Yeah, what was that conversation like?
Yeah. Well, it's kinda like, "No, no, I don't." My dad, especially my dad, because he was like I say, he had a lot of health issues, but he was mentally fine, and that wasn't something he really wanted to do. Was They'd been in that home for almost 40 years.
What finally got them over that objection?
Well, I don't really know. I think they sat down and he saw how much care she needed. When she finally came home, she went through some intensive rehab before she came home. We actually got her to the point that she could walk upstairs for a while. That declined again. So we could actually get her into the house, which was because they had a back steep back stairs, like 12 steps to get up to the back
Oh
door to
gosh.
get in. So anyway, he saw how much care she needed. I think that made a huge difference to him.
Do you think it was also it sounds like you gave them some space, like you brought it up, but then there was some space there for them to discuss it. Do you feel like that was part of it too, that it became his decision?
I think it was. I think it was, and I think he was able to kind of reason with her. She still wasn't thinking totally clearly, but he was able to kind of reason with her. And yes, I think you're right. I wasn't pressing the issue, and we were trying. And when we came home, I found some caregivers. We started out with the agencies, to
Yeah.
bring in-home care. That did not work out as well as I hoped. First of all, they are very expensive, and I assumed that, when you're hiring an agency, well, there would always be somebody available because if somebody got sick, they would have somebody else they could send. Twice at 4 o'clock in the morning, I got a call saying, "We don't have anybody to send."
Oh,
So, I
no.
had to get up and go over and stay the day and take care of her and take care of them. Um,
Wow.
so that kinda put an end to that, and I started looking for private caregivers, and we did pay less for them, and they became like family. I mean, we found some of the most wonderful ladies. One was with us for 4 years.
Wow.
She was one of the first ones who came, and we only had one bad experience in the whole thing with private caregivers, and that was very quick and over with, but we had a lot of wonderful ladies, very, very caring, very adept. I mean, they weren't trained at anything. They weren't CNAs or anything like that. They were just very, very caring women.
What was the bad experience?
Ah,
And how did you discover it?
well, it was a lady that we hired right at the beginning, and actually it was from a newspaper ad that she had put in. She said she had all kinds of wonderful references and this sort of thing. I had forgotten to ask her the first day or 2 that she was there. Our lawyer had said, "We need to make up a little contract just to kind of keep things, expectations, make them clear."
And for our listeners, when you're working with a company, you do sign something. There is something
Mm,
there, but what we're talking about is a private duty, someone who's
right.
not associated with a company. So that's really smart.
Mhm, it is. I was glad he recommended that, and a couple of other of the ladies had already signed it, and I had just forgotten to get this woman to, and so when I asked her to, she just went berserk. It was it was kind of scary, and she said, "I have sat for so and so and so and so," and she named a couple of big names, and his mother and this mother, and she said, "I've never had to sign anything like this, and I you don't trust me," and I said, "It's not that I don't trust you," and I said, "The other." So there was no reasoning with her. She just stormed out of there and left that day.
And that might have been a blessing in
A
disguise.
blessing exactly. Yes, I think it was. So yeah, I
Wow.
really think it was,
Wow.
but had no other problems with anyone else. It was, really a good experience, and like I say, they became like family. But even though we weren't paying the higher prices of the agencies, it still takes a toll on your money. And this is one thing I kinda wanted to talk about today is that it is a very real concern that your parents can outlive their money. My mom had worked in banking for years, and she was very good with finances. She had been very good at making investments, making sure that they were comfortable. But they took a hit back in 2008 when we had the downturn, their investments took a hit just like everyone else's, and they never really recovered fully from that. It was a concern to me that they would outlive their money. Now, we went along, for 3 years. My mom lived her 3 more years, and we had caregivers every day. They would stay until 5 o'clock. My dad would kind of watch over things, and he would, because he could call and let me know if there was a problem. And then I would come back at night and put her to bed. Every morning, I would come in the morning I was still caregiver too. I was coming in the morning because I had to give her an injection in the morning and see that everything was, on board. Come at night. The caregivers were wonderful. We instituted a notebook which they would write down any notes, anything they observed, any problems, just anything like that. And then I could leave them notes, we're going to the doctor tomorrow. I need her blood pressure list. And it was great. It's a tip I like to give people is the notebook. It's very important.
Yes.
And that communication was, we kept that open and strong. And my dad, it was once again around the holidays, my dad developed appendicitis.
Oh my gosh.
Went into the hospital. I know here he is 80 something years old and he's got appendicitis, was very sick, then had complications afterwards and just went downhill and he went into renal failure, had to go on dialysis.
Oh my gosh.
So he spent the next 3 months going back and forth between the hospital and rehab. And all this time, I'm trying to take care of my mom, make sure she's being taken care of at home. Then we've got to get somebody at night because he's not there to watch over her and trying to be up there as much as I can with him because, you need an advocate in the hospital as much as you do
Absolutely.
anywhere else. So I'm going back and forth. At one point, they were both in the hospital at the same time, and I was going from one floor to another.
Oh my
It was a
gosh.
nightmare, but
Oh my
but
gosh.
anyway, but, so he was in the hospital actually the last 3 months of her life because he came home the day after her funeral,
Oh.
and he came home on dialysis, O2 24/7 O2, wound care, home health, rehab. I had no time to even grieve my mom. I had to jump right back into caregiving.
Mm.
So we did. We soldiered on.
How was that for you?
It was hard.
Because so often we hear of the caregivers getting sicker than the ones they're caring for. You
Mm.
know, how did you manage through all of that?
It was not easy. And you're right, you did, there was, like, between June of 2012 and June of 2013, when my mom died, in March of 2013, but that year, it seemed like everything happened. In June of 2012, she was in the hospital for an entire month, and I spent the entire month up there with her day and night. And then I developed some health problems. It's just like one thing after another. It was just that the year of you know what, right there. And in fact, when she passed away, I had noticed just like a day or two before she was on hospice the last few days of her life. And I had noticed all of a sudden it seemed like something was wrong with my vision, but you just push it to the back. It's like, I can't think about that now. I cannot think about that. And the day after she passed away, we were going to the funeral home. My husband was driving. We were going down the street, and I thought, "What is wrong with my vision?" And so I covered one eye, and everything was okay. Covered the other eye, and the cars coming down the street toward us just disappeared. Thought, "Ooh, this is not good." So I had what they called a macular hole. Fortunately, it was not something I had to take care of right away. She sent me straight to a retinal doctor. He said, "Go bury your mother. It's okay. It's not gonna get any worse." But that's one of those things, like you say, it's,
Ugh.
you just you can't take care of yourself because you've got too much to do. You've gotta look after
Yeah.
them.
Is
So,
that caused by stress?
no, it's not.
Oh,
It said
okay. I was
he
like,
said,
"Oh my
"As
gosh."
we age," I said, "You coulda gone all day and not said that," but he said, "As we age," he said, "the gel shrinks in your eye and it can pull, away from the
Oh
back
my
of the eye." So
gosh.
that's what caused it, but
Ugh. Terrible timing though.
terrible timing. Absolutely, absolutely. But anyway, after my mom passed away, I'm taking my dad back and forth to dialysis, and fortunately, and this was another huge blessing, I feel like from God, after 4 months, he was able to come off dialysis, which
Wow.
is not a typical scenario that people come off dialysis. So
Wow.
that was, a big relief there. And,
Yes.
so we went on for a year. He stayed home for a year, and then we started talking about the money situation. I said, we've paid private sitters for 4 years now, and I said, "I'm just kinda worried." He was very reasonable, talked about it, and we said, "Let's just look at assisted living." And I sat down and I ran the numbers, and the money we were paying for both the private caregivers and just taking care of the home. Their house was paid off, so we didn't have to worry about a mortgage, but just utilities and repairs, and you got a 45-year-old house, there's always something has to be repaired. The refrigerator went out. I
Mhm.
came in one day and the wonderful caregiver that was with us so long had her head in the refrigerator pulling stuff out because everything was melting and dissolving, and she said, "The refrigerator's gone out."
Oh,
So, it was just always something. They lived on a lot with a whole bunch of trees. Trees would die, and, that's $800, $900 to take down a tree. It was always something. And so I started looking into different facilities, and I looked at the price, and we could actually move him into assisted living, even though it's not cheap, and pay less than we were paying for him to have caregivers and the cost of being at home. Plus, we could sell his house and have that. And we had a huge estate sale, which, they didn't have really, really expensive things or anything, but that just gathered a little bit more money. And I just felt like you would have room to breathe.
and so then with your dad, Now it was more a financial situation where it was like, okay, your money's going to run out
Yeah.
and then what are we going to do? Kind of a thing. Was that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what was the
Yeah.
touring process like for you and for your dad? Did he help pick out or were your options more limited because of finances?
Well, both. I went ahead, I said, "Let me do the legwork," because he could not stand and walk well. By that time, he was actually using a motorized chair, and we didn't really have a means to carry the chair with us. Anytime I took him anywhere to the doctor's office or whatever, I pushed him, and we're talking
Wow.
about 6'7" man that weighed 250 pounds. I pushed him
Oh
in a
my
little
gosh.
transport chair.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I said, "Let me do the legwork. Let me see what I can find." I started visiting different facilities. One was brand new. The closest one to us was brand new, was very, very nice facility, but was expensive. And,
Yeah.
so that's and plus they kind of, they had different levels. The level of care go up and you have to pay more. So, it was
Right.
it's
Right.
kinda like à la carte. You're paying more for every little thing.
Exactly.
So I went to 2 or 3 other places, and one was in a little town. We're kind of out in the country a little bit, town close to us, and there where I usually went to do my grocery shopping and different errands and things, would be convenient for me to visit. It was very nice, and I knew the nurse that was over the assisted living part of it.
Oh,
They had
wow.
independent living and assisted living. So I got to talk with her, and I felt really good about it. And so I told my dad, "So let's go visit it." And they said, "To bring him in, we'll bring him for lunch." And she said, we have a nice little dining room. He can kind of meet some of the people. Well, food is my dad's love language. So so we went, had a real nice lunch, and he thought, "Oh, yeah, I like this place."
Oh, I
People
love
came
it.
over and said hi to us. We knew a few people who had been, were in our church, and so it was a good experience for him. And so we went and talked to them about. I thought, we'll have to be put on a long waiting list. This will be a long, slow process. And suddenly they had 2 openings, and they offered us one.
Wow.
So it was kinda like, "Okay, we'll talk about it." And so we said, "If we're gonna do it, let's do it." Within a month, he was moved in. Of course,
Wow. Oh
then
my gosh.
yeah, then we had the job of cleaning out a house that
Then
they'd
you have
lived
all
in.
the other work.
Exactly, that they've lived in for 40 years. And my mom, thankfully, she was very good about always keeping things cleaned out and throwing away. She wasn't a pack rat. My dad was.
Oh,
So,
no.
the house itself wasn't too bad, but go down to the garage and his workroom, and it was, oh my, it was a mess. But anyway,
Did you end up hiring someone to help you guys go through all of that other outside of the estate sale folks?
yeah, well, even that we did ourselves. No, it was we
Oh,
just called it an
really?
estate sale.
Oh my
We did it
goodness.
all, yeah.
Wow.
No,
That's a lot of
it
work.
is, it is. And my husband had just recently retired, though, so he was able to help me. My sister, who lives about 7 hours away, they came down for one weekend and helped us do a lot of the heavy lifting and moving and stuff. Then my son, who lives a few hours away, he and his at that time fiance came, and when we were getting ready to have the sale, they priced everything for us. So it was just like, we had little help along the way, a lot of work in between, but we had little help along the way, and that was wonderful.
You had a team and everyone came in to help. That's really great.
We did.
Was it emotional for you?
Yes,
It had to be on some level. Yeah.
it was, and it was actually the move-in for him to be so receptive of the idea and ready to move. Once we got moved in, it was harder than I expected. He was still, of course, even though he was not on dialysis, he was still in kidney failure. I think they called it stage 3 at the time, and I was, warning him. He had multiple, multiple problems, and I said, "We need to watch your sodium, we need to watch your fluids. You're still on fluid restriction." And I had told the nurse and the staff there, "We need to keep limited in this." Well, he didn't like being told. And I think a lot of it was just the stress of moving. They had been in one place for so long, and even though he was okay mentally, it's still the older you get, the more you don't like change. It was hard for him, and then being told what he could drink and how much he's was a salt lover anyway, and how much salt he could use, and he didn't like that. So we had a few battles. I finally told them, "Just back off. Just leave him alone. We can't control it. We'll deal with it when he has a problem."
He's earned his salt.
Yeah, yeah, I
He's
guess, and
he's lived long enough to earn that
yeah.
salt.
So, I said, "If it makes him go down, it makes him go down," but,
That brings up a really good point, though. You're going through so many steps to the whole process, and it's easy to forget sometimes about some of the steps. And, one of them is the transition.
mhm,
So, even though someone, like you're saying, he was really receptive to it, but then the actual transition, had those bumps in the road.
right, right, and it was difficult.
Yeah, that happens
Mm.
sometimes. How long did it take him before everybody sort of got on the same page and he was able to relax, or was he ever able to enjoy
He
and
did, he did. It was I mean, just the first few weeks, I think, were just tough, and he finally kind of settled in. They had, like, little exercise programs. Like I said, he was basically chair-bound by that point. He would use his motorized chair. Was funny, this is something you may not have ever heard of, is though they required us to get some insurance, kind of like renter's insurance, that if he ran into anything with that chair or ran into anybody with that chair.
Oh, yes. It does not surprise me because there are many communities that don't allow
Mm,
them
really?
because of the liability issues. So that's a nice
Mhm.
workaround
Yeah.
for any communities out there that are
True,
listening. Just have them get some insurance.
true, true. And, so, yeah, but he kinda settled in. They had, like, extra little exercise classes where they would sit in a chair and, do things with their arms and stuff, and he did that one time and said, "That's silly, I'm not doing that." And so, he would do some of the activities that they did there, but he was kind of a loner, and he always had been, and that was one thing they didn't understand. More than once, they would say, "I think maybe your dad's depressed. He won't participate in this." And I said, "He's just that's just the way he is." He had a tablet he played games on, he watched his basketball games. It was just like, "Leave me alone. I'm okay. Just leave me alone." And so it took me a while to convince them he's not depressed, he's really not. This is just him. And so
Wow.
we had to get past that too.
So that's another example of you being an advocate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It
I
is.
think that's so important. We did an episode not too long ago about when does your role of caregiving end?
Mm,
Or, how do you deal with that transition? But there are even moving into an assisted living, there are still things that you are going to be doing from a caregiving perspective. And advocating is definitely one of them.
yes.
And so this was, another example. And absolutely, it's so important to share, even with an assisted living,
Mhm.
what your loved one is like and the fact that your dad just wanted to be left alone.
Mhm. Mhm. That's
I
right.
love that.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that.
That's right. They did require, and he went along with this, he wasn't an early riser, but he had to get up at a certain time and go down for breakfast. He had to go down for all 3 meals. And so that was okay. I was okay with that because that got him out of the room, at least at times, and around other people, and he made friends and talked to other people and stuff, and kinda had a little lady friend for a while. They would play Chinese checkers for a
Oh
while.
my goodness.
Yeah, and,
What was that like
that was
for you?
it was fine. I mean, it wasn't anything romantic really, but people would tease them, about it. But she's was real sweet little lady. But she finally ended up having to go to another, I think even a nursing home because she fell, had a really bad fall. She had very bad arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. So, everything kind of fell into place. He did okay. I do want to say this too, going back to the finances. This is probably not a typical thing, but it's something to kind of be aware of, in case there's a facility like this in your area. This particular facility was run by the Methodist Church, and they had something called a Sunday fund. And if you had lived there for at least a year and your money ran out, they would not kick you out, which I actually asked the other facility, the one that I said, the new facility that was closer to us, and if you didn't pay, you were gone.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you are bringing that up. Which state are you in? You are in Mississippi?
Mississippi. Mhm.
Yeah. And so every state is a little bit different. And
Mhm.
I'm here in Washington state, and there are programs like that as well. where there are churches that run assisted living communities and they have these funds. Yeah, so I think it's more common, which is a good thing because finances are it's so expensive like we've talked about. And so that's really great that you had your finger on the button of those finances and you knew to ask that question because what would have happened, and this is so hard. We definitely work with families that have already spent that year of funding, right? And now we're looking for a state
Mhm,
pay facility Medicaid. What would have happened if you hadn't have asked that
mhm,
question, right? And then all the money would have been gone, and then you wouldn't have qualified
mhm,
for the program at the church-run assisted living. So, that was another one of those blessings, I
mhm,
think, for
mhm.
you and your story.
It was. It was a huge relief to me to know that we didn't have to worry about that. Now, he did not run out of money. Everything was fine. Now, he lived there for 2 years before he passed away. But it was such a relief. And, you talked about moving him in and all that. It was a huge weight off my shoulders to move him into assisted living, to know that I was not constantly responsible, having to go over there to his house constantly. My husband and I walk around the lake here where we live, and we would walk shortly after we moved him into assisted living, we would walk past his house, and I said, "Oh, no, there's another dead tree we're gonna have to call." And I thought, "No, that's not my problem anymore." But even then, you're still the caregiver, and, you said,
Yeah.
you're still advocating. I would still get calls in the middle of the night if he fell and I had to take him to the emergency room. I still had to
Mhm.
take him to the doctor every time. You're not done. It's not like, phew, I'm pushing him off. And so I don't think people should feel guilty if they can't continue the level of care they started with. It's just a different type of care. And you're still the daughter, you're still the caregiver, but it's just a different type of care. You're still overseeing things, and I think most everybody who does care for their loved ones, they care enough that they're not just, shoving them off to somebody else to care for them. You're still there.
I love that you're bringing that up. We actually just had another interview with a family caregiver who talked about how some people were so cruel. They were, saying things like, "Why are you putting them in that facility? Why are you doing that?" When they just didn't understand the weight that caregiving held.
Mhm.
So I'm really glad that you're bringing that up because I think that's important. If they're not going through it right now, they don't
Yeah.
understand. But understand that the probability that you are gonna be in that position someday is pretty big.
That's true. That's true. Yes, it's skyrocketing. It is. It
Yeah, and
is.
this is where I really hope that this episode can help another family. And, one of the things that we ask our guests is if they just have one doable tip for families that are going through this right now or maybe in the future, what would your doable tip be?
Hmm. I think it's what we've already talked about is the advocating, is that you need to be an advocate. There were so many times that I had to speak up, not only for my mom, but for my dad. Just know that they need you. They can't a lot of times speak for themselves. My mom couldn't speak for herself at all. My dad, I was in the hospital one time and a nurse came in. We had spent the night in the emergency room and getting checked in, and I was exhausted. I was kind of asleep on the couch, but kind of half awake, and she was sneaked in, trying not to wake me up, and she said, "I've got some medicine for you," and he said, I heard him say, "What is it?" And she said, "It's a nitroglycerin patch." And he said, "Okay." And I jumped up off the couch because his doctor had said he is on a medication that he must never get nitroglycerin, it could kill him. And he didn't remember that. He did not remember that. Even though he was okay mentally, he did not remember that. And I jumped up and stopped her just in time. So, just being an advocate, just know that you're not being pushy, you're not being overbearing if you advocate for your loved one. And do research. If I hadn't done that research on normal pressure hydrocephalus, I might not have been bold enough to say, I think there's a test we can do to make sure. Don't be afraid to advocate for your loved one.
Today's episode is brought to you by ClearPath Senior Living Solutions. ClearPath helps families find assisted living, memory care, and other resources. Find our contact information in today's show notes. Check out this episode's doable download in show notes for details, including industry terms and definitions we discussed, as well as a bonus tip from our guest. Have questions or your own tips to share? Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, make it doable.